Most of you probably know the story of the honey badger, a rather small but fearless aggressive animal that is rarely trifled with by predators, which has allowed it to become widely distributed across the world, being found in Africa, Southwest Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. However, to the west, there is another rather small animal that gives even the honey badger a run for its money in the badassery department, and actually is even less bothered by predators, with less than 5% of them ever being attacked. And it's so avoided by wildlife that for a long time, scientists actually thought that predators were born to fear them. And what is this mythical creature, you may ask? Well, it's the one and only skunk. Now, the word skunk encompasses more than just one species, but I am specifically talking about the most successful member, and one of the largest, the striped skunk, which is also the guy people typically default to when imagining a skunk in general, given their commonness. And they are found virtually all over the United States, as well as parts of Canada and Mexico, numbering in the millions, or perhaps even the tens of millions. And this sizable population is no coincidence, as they have developed a wide range of traits that make them in many ways an unstoppable force that nearly nothing seems to want to mess with. But from looks alone, you probably would not assume this. After all, they aren't exactly huge, with most weighing no more than 10 pounds or 4.5 kilos. Meanwhile, despite being stout, having claws and some sharp teeth, they don't exactly put to shame other American predators when it comes to intimidation, being objectively outclassed by bears, cougars, wolves, and even coyotes. So, what gives? Well, considering what they're really known for, you probably know the answer already. But how exactly does smell become an animal's ultimate weapon? And the answer starts with their rear ends. And no, I'm not being crass, that's just where skunks possess not one, but two scent glands that sit on either side of its butt, each being filled to the brim with highly noxious musk that is oily, yellow in appearance, and is made up of a mixture of powerful thiols, which simply put are chemical compounds characterized by the presence of a sulfhydryl group. Now, that still might not mean much to you, but let's just say it doesn't smell great. And the striped skunk has managed to weaponize it by also developing the ability to launch it directly at threats, thanks to some rather impressive sphincter control. In fact, they don't just spray things in a general sense, but rather in a more deliberate, precise sense, as they also have nipple-like protrusions, allowing them to control the flow rate of their pungent fluids, and aim with deadly accuracy. And if you do end up getting hit, it's also deadly, figuratively, maybe sometimes literally. But regardless though, you definitely still want to really try and avoid getting any of this on you, because it's essentially described as smelling like a combination of garlic, burning sulfur, and sewer gas, so not the best. However, it's not even the smell per se that has skunks so protected, but instead, the sheer intensity of it. Many people erroneously think skunk spray isn't that bad, as if you live in America, you might get a whiff of it here or there when driving or walking around. But here's the thing most people don't realize, which is that 99.9% of the time, that smell you're smelling is actually coming from very, very far away. But because skunk musk is so powerful, we can detect it even farther than a dead decomposing body. Much farther actually, with it being detectable up to 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers away. So in other words, if you get hit up close, it's a whole different ballgame. And one of the earliest accounts of a skunk does a good job of describing the ordeal, having come from an unlucky researcher in the 1600s, who said, I quote, "It is so stinking and casts so foul an odor that it is unworthy of being called the dog of Pluto. No sewer ever smelled so bad, and I would not have believed it if I had not smelled it myself. Your heart almost fails when you approach the animal. So yeah, bad." And honestly, it is so powerful that getting a direct hit is actually a whole lot scarier than your nose just being assaulted. As for starters, you can expect the blast to burn the bejeebers out of your eyes, causing not only pain, but literal temporary blindness, as like tear gas, it contains lacrimators, which will irritate your eyes to say the least. But as your eyes stream tears of pain, and you try to take a breath to calm yourself, you then suddenly find yourself in some serious respiratory distress, because as it enters your lungs, it would cause further burning, coughing, sneezing, and even vomiting. And the smell alone is so pungent that it can literally cause diarrhea in people due to the intensity of disgust. And the real kicker is not only that these symptoms happen, but rather their duration. Remember how I said this stuff is oily? Well, it's also incredibly sticky and extremely hard to remove from surfaces, sometimes staying in an area for up to a month. And meaning that any animal facing a skunk's nuclear fart spray would find their world flipped upside down for a very long time. And though the symptoms are generally just very unpleasant, there is also a sinister side to skunk spray. As if an animal accidentally ingests too much of it, they can find themselves in deep, deep trouble, seeing that the spray not only smells toxic, but is literally toxic, and to such an extent that it will cause red blood cells to literally die, potentially leading to anemia. So for anyone with an exotic palate who is considering trying it out, just don't. Clearly, it's best to avoid this spray and thus creature altogether, and its neighbors have clearly gotten this message, which is why the skunk has so few predators despite its size. And actually, the degree to which other animals will avoid it is even more extreme than we originally thought. In 2024, a study led by Theodore Stankiewicz, and yes, that's his real name, took coyotes who had either been born in captivity or removed from the wild, and gave them food inside a model the shape and color of a skunk, with the goal of having the coyotes learn that skunk-looking things equals dinner. But after conditioning them like Pavlov's dog, the researchers added a little stinky surprise by adding skunk spray to all of the models. And let's just say that immediately did the trick, as suddenly over 70% of the coyotes refused to go even near the food, and those that did stopped after the researchers added a bit more. And the craziest part of all of this is that researchers used a spray which only had 0.9% skunk juice in it, versus obviously the 100% which occurs when an actual skunk sprays you. So imagine that. The spray at 1% of its usual potency was still disgusting enough to deter 70% of coyotes, who, mind you, were literally conditioned to not fear skunks. And another interesting observation they made during this experiment was that some coyotes failed to even qualify for the test, as off the bat they refused to approach the skunk models, despite never seeing one before, whereas they were fine approaching other animal models, and thus leading to the conclusion that the black and white contrast seen in striped skunks was enough of a deterrent by itself. And this is a classic form of aposematism, which is when an animal advertises through color or some visible features that they are not worth attacking. In other words, it's basically nature's, "Bud, it's not worth it." So imagine that, a defense so potent that evolution basically tosses camouflage out the window, and decides the best option is to make you stick out like a sore thumb. And yet, it works. And really, the only downside that a skunk has when it comes to defense is one that many projectile weapons know all too well, and that's an ammo issue. Striped skunks only have enough fuel, so you could say, for about 5 to 6 successive sprays. And once they're out for a while, with replenishment taking about 10 days. So in other words, every shot counts. Which is why skunks usually do all they can to avoid having to rely on their secret weapon, employing hisses, foot stamping, and high tail postures that give plenty of warning to daring animals. And in some cases, they're also known to even rely on their bite for defense, so they have options. And even the babies have options too, seeing that striped skunks have developed the amazing ability to unleash liquefied death only 2 weeks after birth. Which might not sound crazy, but to put this into perspective, skunks only open their eyes 3 weeks after birth, meaning that spraying things into oblivion is more second nature to these guys than seeing is. And these adaptations have rewarded them handsomely, as like I mentioned, less than 5% of skunks are ever killed by predators. And what's more, is that this number is largely made up of just one animal, and is really the only creature considered to be a regular threat to striped skunks. And that's the great horned owl. These relatively large owls eat just about anything they can take down, and this includes striped skunks, to whom they have a very peculiar defense to, and that's a terrible sense of smell, allowing them to not only feast on skunks, but even on the skunk's skunk glands, showing absolutely no care in the world for the repulsive spray. And their terrible sense of smell also seems to add another indirect benefit, being that because they feast on skunks, sometimes their nest will develop the smell of one, and thus creating a sort of natural protection against many other animals, like wildcats, coyotes, and so on. Yet, at the end of the day, even these guys don't usually dent skunk numbers that much, and striped skunks are one of the most protected animals when it comes to their population levels. And it's not just their effective defense or striking appearance that has got them to where they are today, with another huge advantage being their adaptability. You see, you can plop skunks about just anywhere and they'll be fine, seeing that they are essentially vacuum cleaners, having diets more diverse than the amount of ice cream flavors at a Ben & Jerry's. Insects, meat, plant material, garbage, you name it, they can eat it. And their claws also allow them to dig and sift around for food very effectively, allowing them to become one of the few creatures known to adapt quite well to urban environments. What's more is that raw and rotten things are generally on the menu, seeing that their digestive systems are both extremely fast, meaning bacteria doesn't have time to grow, and highly acidic, killing off pretty much anything else of concern. Oh, and don't be surprised if you see these guys munching on highly venomous snakes either, because they also happen to be immune to snake venom. Pretty nifty. and this immunity is extended to stinging bugs, like wasps or bees, through their thick coats, allowing them to become one of the few animals that can regularly eat them. And just as a cherry on top, their food-finding abilities are further enhanced through the possession of extremely remarkable senses of hearing and smell. A bit ironic considering their weapon of choice. And scientists do actually assert that even they are not immune to the smell, but often don't seem as bothered by it as others, leading some to reckon that over time, they just get used to how bad they smell. Something which can unfortunately happen to people too. Now, with everything combined, there's no doubt they're kind of OP, but nature did decide to nerf them in at least one department, their sight, as striped skunks are actually as blind as bats, not being able to see any object that is farther than 3 meters or 10 feet away. In the wild, this isn't a huge issue, thanks to their other senses and natural get away from me signs. But in urban areas, it has made them vulnerable to becoming roadkill, unfortunately. So please do watch out for these little guys on the road, both for their sake and for your sake. But all in all, striped skunks are quite the package, so maybe we should be a bit thankful that generally skunks are actually fairly nice to people, and in some states, it's even legal to own them as a pet. Though that being said, I still wouldn't recommend approaching them in the wild, because besides the smell, they do carry rabies from time to time, and that's one thing you really do not want to get. But there is actually another animal that is not only immune to rabies and the plague, but also has survival adaptations that put even the skunk to shame. And if that sounds interesting, check out the video I made on them. Thanks for watching, and until next time.